Ironside will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following special program.
Please support the Word Balloon podcast by going to patreon.com/wordballoon. Become a part of the League of Word Balloon listeners. That's patreon.com/wordballoon. This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by Ithacon, April 5th and 6th at Emerson Suites on the Ithaca College campus in Ithaca, New York. Saturday, April 5th and Sunday, April 6th. Ticket prices are $25 with kids admission free. Tickets are available at ithacon.org. That's ITHACON.org. Among the guests, Don McGregor of Black Panther fame, Chris Condon, featured in Ultimate Wolverine and Green Arrow, Matt Bors from Ahoy's Toxic Avenger, Mike Gold, known for Green Arrow, Warlord, and Wasteland, and the legendary Louise and Walter Simonson. There'll be cosplay, gaming, and kids' activities. And Ithacon is offering swag bags for the first 250 attendees that buy tickets. These overstuffed swag bags offer $20 to $50 values in comic books and more. Come see all the fun at Ithacon April 5th and 6th at Emerson Suites on the Ithaca College campus in Ithaca, New York. For more details and tickets, come to ithacon.org. Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress with you. Always happy to talk to a good friend of mine. I can't even get my words straight, Mike. We have known each other a long time, and then we discovered that we had more in common than just comics. We had our radio backgrounds in Chicago, and no, it's always good to see Mike Gold back on Word Balloon. How you been, Mike?
I've been doing fine, John. My heart is always in Chicago. And it drives my New York friends here crazy. So,
Mike, it's our revenge for AJ Liebling's mean moniker, the Second City, which we took as a badge of honor. And yeah, man, it's funny, Bert, my good friend Bert Sugar, who's no longer with us from the boxing world, he knew his Chicago joints. He went to the University of Michigan for college, and he would spend his summers in Chicago. And he was even like running around with Bob Newhart and stuff in like the late 50s.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty crazy. So yeah, he, much like you, I lean on you guys for the joints that I'm not aware of. And he's still of, I don't know if you remember, it was outside of the city, but again, you were a suburb guy too. Charlie Beinlich's, north of the city. Yeah. He loved that place. He's like, oh my God, great burgers. I'm like, of course, man. Of course I'm going to take you there. No problem.
Okay. When we start talking about Chicago food, I lose it. I just lose it. Day before yesterday, I ordered a couple of pounds of Italian beef from Portillo's.
Beautiful. Attaboy.
And that's because I couldn't make it to C2E2 this year.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. But good news, you're going to be at Ithacon.
I'm going to be at Ithacon.
We're talking today, absolutely. And everybody, don't forget, you just saw the commercial, ithacon.org. If you need tickets, it's going to be a great thing. In fact, not only am I talking to Mike today, but Dean Haspiel and Vito Del Sante are coming on tonight to talk about the show as well. So ithacon.org, everybody.
That's great. Dean has been a friend for very long, since he was a small child, helping Howard Chaykin on American Flag. That's when I first met him. And I figured since then, anybody who can put up with Howard, friend of mine.
Mitch Halleck and I of Terrificon and I were talking last night about Howard, and he in a good way drives me nuts because as you know, Howard loves to sing the Great American Songbook at the drop of a hat.
Yes.
And they have a private karaoke space at Mohegan Sun where you and your friends just do it and you're not at a bar, and they also have bar stuff. And in the past, I've told some of the other comic creators that like to do karaoke, I'm like, hey, let's do that. So he's tabling next to Walt Simonson at Terrificon, and I'm like, Howard, I go, let's do karaoke. He's like, I hate karaoke. I'm like, Howard, you sing at the drop of a hat. I'm like, and I go, you got to come, man. I go, I sing Sinatra, but I don't do, You Make Me Feel So Young or Got You Under My Skin. I'm like, I do Zing with the Strings of My Heart. And he goes, Dear When You Smile at Me. And I'm like, that's my point. That's my point, Howard. My God. I don't do it. I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. And of course, Walt's like that great high-pitched laugh that Walt does and everything. And they were studio mates back then. Weren't they studio mates when Dean and Howard were, when Dean was up with Howard? Yeah.
Oh, that was just the most awesome studio ever in comics history, including the various Eisner studios. It had Frank Miller and Walter Simonson and Howard Chaykin, and then there was sort of a rotating group. Jim Starlin was often there, just all kinds of wonderful, swell people. Frank and I got into a long discussion that completely alienated everybody else in the room because we discovered we were both Zatoichi fans. Now, back in those days, not a lot of Americans knew who Zatoichi was. And we would just babble because by that point in time, there was like 24 Zatoichi movies and the TV series. And, it's just great mindless comic book fun that I think heavily influenced Frank's career, actually.
Howard, pardon me, Mike, I was going to say, forgive me if you had more about that story. I don't want to.
No, it's cool.
I was going to say, because again, I'm betting even more places when we were young, and also whatever. But really, the demise of brick and mortar spaces and the ease of finding things online. On the one hand, it's great that we can find this stuff now so quickly, but I kind of miss those weird little brick and mortar joints. Facet, as you remember, Facets Multimedia not only go foreign movies, but also had the video store as well. So and even that's like obviously late 70s, 80s. But the great comic stores like Larry's Comics and Moonstone and or was Moondog, right? Moondog. Yeah, Gary Colombo. Yeah. Who's also been on this show. But yeah, man, I and also God, if I knew then what I know now, I'd get in my time machine and I'd go to Skokie, right by the Skokie Swift L station, and go to the news depot.
Yes.
It was in that strip mall, and in the back they had all those old comics, man. Dirt cheap.
It was a wonderful place. The guy who ran it used to have a store around the corner from where Steve King lived in Lincolnwood. And that's where I met him. And then we go out to Skokie, and I realized, wow, he got a store right next to one of my favorite hot dog places in the world. And as a true loyal, faithful Chicagoan, I was in heaven. That was it. Perfect. I'm a half a block from Kaufman's Deli, one of the best delis in the world. And the Hot Dog Island, which was no longer an island since it moved, and it's gone now because Target took over the whole block.
Yes, you're right, man.
and while in the days when I still liked Target, I thought that was very fortuitous in case I ever move back, which is what every expatriated Chicagoan thinks all the time. I will happily move back to Chicago. I would prefer doing so if it were 1947. That's the Chicago I miss.
Really interesting.
Well, I grew up with the L. Those of you folks who aren't from Chicago, take notes.
Indeed.
The elevated train is only elevated about a third of the scheme there.
From the ground, yeah.
About a third. But when I was a kid, my parents wouldn't buy me an electric train. They said that we didn't have enough room in our apartment, which was probably true, but I know the real reason. I knew it then. They just didn't have the bucks. Okay, fine. We lived a block from the Ravenswood terminal in Albany Park on Lawrence and Kimball.
Okay.
That yard, which is still there.
Oh yeah.
The building isn't, but the yard is there. That was my toy train set growing up.
That's great, man. Sure.
Not only that, but in true Chicago fashion, there was a cigar store across the street from the terminal, and the cigar store had a little newsstand, and I'd buy some of my comics there. I would buy some of my comics everywhere I went because we didn't have comic book stores or
You bet.
fanzines that told us what was on sale. And in the back, I told my father that's where I got my comics, and my father laughed. And I asked him why he was laughing, and he said, well, did they take you to the back room? And I said, no. And he says, well, if you need to play poker.
They had a back room where they were constantly playing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's great, man.
The only time they cleared it out, and I know this this is a whole nother story. Wait for this next story. I found out in 1955 when I was 4.5 years old. They'd clear out the gambling stuff to put in voting machines. And there were a lot of elections in Daley's era. Mike Rico used to make jokes about how all he was doing in heaven was counting the votes, and I think that's probably true. There was a barbershop on Montrose near Kedzie, which had a great drugstore where I bought Fantastic Four #1.
There you go.
And, oh my God, yeah. And they had the back gambling thing, cleared it all out. My mother, that's our precinct.
Sure.
So my mother walks me over because I'm 4.5, and babysitters, no. And it was the first election where they had voting machines.
Cool.
Small
Yeah.
machines, with the little levers.
Yeah.
And they had
I
a
remember.
display on how to work it. And my mother goes in and, she pulls the lever and she disappears. And I'm 4.5, so I start to get upset.
Aw.
And this big old Paul is short for politician in Chicagoese, comes up to me, oh, what's the matter, little boy? And my mommy disappeared. And he says, oh, yeah, no, she's voting. Here, I'll show you. And he escorts me to a machine, and he shows me how if I flip the levers, little X's come up. And then if I flip another lever, the whole Democratic side is lit.
Right.
With little X's. And he showed me how to do it. And then he showed me how to make my vote count by pulling the lever. And I walked out, and my mother was sitting there waiting for me. And I go, hey, Mommy, I voted. And my mother just laughed her ass off. Nobody doubted that I voted. And that was the first primary, which was the same thing as the election in those days.
Sure.
For Richard J. Daley in 1955.
Hilarious.
So my first vote, which was nowhere near legal, but in Chicago.
Oh, it counts, kid. Yeah. If you can reach the lever, oh no, hey, no problem. All right. He's a citizen. What's the problem? No, never mind. The best when the Sun bulldozed the airport that was downtown, and now it's blanking on me. The private airport. Mix Field. That a boy. See, this is why I talk to you, Mike. Absolutely. He had a press conference the next day, and it was just like his father, and it was classic Chicago machine politics in action because there was no notice. The boulders just came, they tore it all up, and the press is like, well, why didn't you tell us? Well, I'm telling you now. Yeah, but it's already done. Yeah, well, yeah, and I'm telling you now. And it's like, yeah. I mean, it was truly very consistent with the current administration of, what's the problem? Yeah. No, we did it. And it's like, oh my God, they got rid of Meigs Field. Jesus.
Yeah. I have a curious relationship with Meigs Field. I
Tell me.
tried to fly into Meigs 3 times, but each time it was closed, bad weather.
This is for small planes, everybody, just so you understand. These aren't like, major airlines and stuff. These are puddle jumpers and literally 2 and 4 seaters and private jets or private planes. I don't even know if jets were allowed in Meigs.
Good question. I don't recall.
I don't know. Yeah.
Probably not. I don't think there's enough room.
Exactly. And it's downtown, like literally on the lake, right by the lake.
It's very convenient if they actually landed there. But I also tried to pick up people several times at Meigs Field. And by the way, a few commercial airlines did fly out of there from time to time.
Okay.
I don't think United did, but I'm fairly certain North Central did, which was important if you needed to get to Michigan real fast.
Okay, sure.
Flo's Barbecue in Detroit is wonderful, but I didn't know about that when Meigs was around. I never once had a successful relationship with Meigs Field. So when Daly plowed it up, and by the way he plowed it up was he had these earth crushers come to the runways and carve big X's on the landing strips.
That's right.
So it wasn't just carving it up. It was giving the finger.
Don't even think about landing here. Exactly.
No, true Chicago
rubble.
Style.
You're going to hit rubble. Yes.
Yeah. John Ostrander and I have this thing that many, 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 many Chicagoans have, where we know the folklore backwards and forwards. We know the characters. George Hagenauer, same way. Chicago has a fascinating history, but it's fascinating not just because of its spirit and because of the beautiful architecture and the unbelievably great junk food. Chicago is unique in that we all have a severe attitude problem. It's the same attitude problem. So we get along just fine with each other. There was no better experience as a young man who lied about his age, but who did not drink alcohol anyway, going into a classic Chicago tavern and just talking with the folks at the bar. That was the most educational experience I ever had. And, and I've been on Studs Terkel's show, so you'd figure I'd know the way, right? I did. It was great.
I got to meet Studs, and actually I put together, trying to do the math now, 23 years ago when it was the 75th anniversary of the Dempsey-Tunney Soldier Field fight. And so this is 2002, and Studs, bless him, still had his office at the Chicago History Museum, which we, of course, know as the Chicago Historical Society. There was no need to change the name of the damn thing, unless you're really stupid. What's that?
Yeah, there are a few fewer letters to clean.
I guess, but I guess it's simpler now. Okay, I guess Chicago history is there. But anyway, so I called his office, and they're like, "Oh, he really works from his home." They're like, "Yeah, he has an office." So I called him. He's like, "Hey, come to the house." So he lived on, right on the lake. I can't remember the street right now, but in a gated kind of section. And I'm like, okay. And he was in his late 80s. He was living with his son, who was in his 60s. And his son answers the door. And I wanted to interview him because he had always said when he was 14, he listened to the Dempsey-Tunney fight. I'm like, all right. So I brought my recording stuff. And as I walk in, he's got a big model ship on a shelf. And I go, oh, that's cool. What is that? And he goes, oh, that's supposed to be the Titanic. Kurt Vonnegut gave it to me because I was born the year the Titanic sank. I'm like, I am walking into history. This is fantastic. Sat down on this couch. He was so amazing, as you know. And then also he came in studio at the sports station we worked at when he was releasing one of his oral history books. And it was awesome. We had a caller call in, and this is why in Chicago, everybody, he was a rabble, as you know, he was a rabble rouser, a guy who would go out in public speaking in the 30s and stuff. And he was a socialist, I believe. I don't think he ever declared himself as such, but definitely extreme left politics. And these people are like, I can't, this guy, this caller. Yeah. That's fair. But yeah, it's because I can't believe you have that communist on. And this guy got on the air, and literally the host and Ed Stud's like, "Oh, get lost, shut up, give me a break, go away." And it was and nothing faced Studs. So yeah, it was I have an autographed copy of the book, and I'm like, Studs, truly, the way you do long interviews, you've been an inspiration to me. I hope to get to a point where I can have oral history kind of conversations, and here we are. And that's what I get to do with Word Balloon for the last 20 years.
Cool thing, and I'm going to get this right back to comics in a heartbeat.
No worries, man. No, this is all good. Keep going.
Cool thing about doing Studs. Studs was one of the true pioneers of early television. And by early, I mean 1948. He had a TV show called Studs Place, which was set in a Chicago bar. That just happened to be frequented by a folk singer, and it was a talk show, it was a chat show. It was wonderful because there was no rehearsal, no script. They didn't even have to have a guest. I mean, Studs was enough. Well, I had done his show maybe 4 times. Once with Abe Peck, and who was editor of the Chicago Seed, where I got my start, and Ed Sanders of the Fugs, and Studs was bewildered, although he knew from the Fugs because they were an old beatnik group. But he, the current references were a little obscure to him. So we would play to that and have fun with that. It was one of the most charming times I ever had. But, and this is how we get back to comics, I had seen him in bookstores in various places a lot, being in Chicago, and I moved to New York in the 70s to work for DC, my first of 2 tenures. And Studs was doing a signing at the Barnes & Noble on Fifth Avenue. And we all, during lunch, would go to different bookstores and stuff. And Steve Mitchell, the inker and now filmmaker, said, "Oh, look, Studs Circle's there. You know that guy, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Here, listen, tell you what. I'm going to go in there, and he's going to sign a book for me. He's going to ask me my name, and I'm going to say Mike Gold, which happens to be my name. But he is going to say that he knew the original Mike Gold, who was a socialist writer and editor, did many books. Jews Without Money is his best-known book.
Wow.
It isn't what you think it is, but it's a damn good book, actually. 1930s socialist. And Steve bet me $5 that he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't say that. He said, "I know the real Mike Gold." I said, "Well, okay." Went up there, signed my book. Says, "Oh, I knew the real Mike Gold." I shot a glance at Steve. I think we were with like Jack C. Harris and 1 or 2 other people, maybe
Cool.
Marty Paston.
Cool.
And,
Marty.
and as we walked out of the Barnes and Noble, Steve handed me my $5. And we had a great time. I mean, it was just wonderful. Just, my response to the Studs was each time was, "Yes, but I'm the real Mike Gold." Because the socialist writer who predated me, that was his pseudonym.
Oh, that's interesting. There you go. Yeah. Hilarious.
And I'm the real thing.
He was amazing, man. Who wrote City on the Make again?
Nelson.
Nelson. I was just say Norman. Nelson. Yeah, Nelson.
My favorite writer. Here's how Harlan Ellison and I resolved a 3-year dispute. Now, 3-year dispute isn't that long for Harlan, and he's a fun guy. If you have a high tolerance for just Harlan, you need to have a tolerance for. You need to have a tolerance for Harlan.
Yep.
But I said, "Look, we should resolve this because I'm about to read your new book." New books from Harlan were very few and far between in his waning days. And I said, "I want to get this bullshit behind us because I'm not going to get a new Nelson Algren book anymore. You're it." And the fact that I compared him to Nelson Algren, which in my book is very high praise, and Harlan's writing is absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
two of my absolute favorite writers, and I think Harlan owes something to Nelson. And as an aside, and a Second City veteran, and Wilderness Road head, runs this little Nelson Algren Appreciation Society in Chicago. And evidently he still does. Warren Lemming is his name. Worked with Del Close, Second City. And it was just a bizarre life. I'm sorry. I have so many different stories colliding in my brain right
Mike,
now.
This is why you come on, and this is why I love when you come on and everything, and it's great. And also, you dropped two names that I was going to get to in our conversation, because I always say the great lost DC series of the 80s was, of course, Wasteland. And I don't know you, and I'm going to first of all, you met. I want to know how John is doing. John Ostrander, the creator of the Suicide Squad, the modern Suicide Squad, I should say.
And Amanda Waller.
And of course, yes, thank you. Absolutely the creator of Amanda Waller. But yeah, how's Johnny doing today?
And the new Mr. Terrific.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Michael Holt. Yeah. Right.
And they had him out for the Superman shooting along with other comics creators.
Great.
Whose characters they adopted for the movie.
I'm gonna have to bug John and get him back on to talk about it. But go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, really. But John had already been not out there because it was opposite sides. He'd been in California for that second Suicide Squad movie.
Yep.
In which he had a performance very
brief
early
cameo.
on.
Brief cameo.
Yeah.
Tell him describe the scene. Absolutely, he's the doctor.
I'm blocking on which villain it was, but he was the guy who put in the chip, so that Amanda could later have his head explode.
Right,
if necessary, which I think it was actually. But they brought him out to Georgia because that's where they were filming Superman, along with all kinds of other cool people and friends and stuff. And I was there with John for the Suicide Squad premiere. No, it was the first Suicide Squad movie. And he's just very bewildered by, the whole red carpet thing. And I had to sort of tell him where to go for the photo ops. They had, his name with a sign on a sign. So all of the photographers could say, "Hey, John, over here. Hey, John, over here." They didn't know who John was. He didn't know who they were either, and he couldn't see them because of the bright lights. So, which was just flooded.
I'm sure.
So he's just sort of there, and I'm kind of nudging him along. Now I've lost some of my hearing since then, so I don't know if I could do that today, but I'm just sort of nudging him along. And the coolest part was that the folks over at DC had sort of encouraged me to help John along. Now I've known John since 1971, since a theater party for the Organic Theater Company. William J. Norris, a great Chicago actor, had an apartment, and John was part of that whole theater scene, and I was just getting involved with the Organic and with Stuart Gordon and those guys.
Yeah.
And we all got clumped together. He says, "Oh, you're that comic book guy. Here." And they took me to a couch where there were 3 other comics fans. And I'm thinking, great, I'm right through the front door and I'm already in the geek hall. Okay. And I'm sitting on a chair there, and 2 of the guys I think were at best somnambulistic. They may have been dead. John was not. And he and I started a conversation because nobody else was talking. And the conversation continued every day from 1971.
That's excellent.
I would take a bullet for John.
No, man. Listen, I had the pleasure at one of those conventions, if not 2, of having you both sit down with me on the floor and even do a short interview back in the day. And no, man, I can't thank you enough for introducing me to John. And he's so great and truly one of the most gentle and shy men. And his talent is so great. And I'm sure I've told you the story before when we were at New York Comic-Con back in 2006. And they shut the doors and the fire marshal we were all, you either were in or you had to wait in line to get back in, and you might be outside waiting in line for like a half hour because they were only letting you in like 10 by 10.
Mort Walker, who was quite elderly then.
Beetle Bailey. Yes, Beetle Bailey creator. Yes, indeed.
Right. Although he's in worse shape now. But he was very old then. Had to stand in line for 3 hours.
There you go.
I had just gotten out of surgery at like 2 weeks earlier, and I was still healing. And my wife, God bless her, would not take any of that bullshit. And she marched right through the convention hall. This was Reed's first Chicago show.
That was in New York? Yeah. With the fire marshal and everything, right? Or is this a Chicago story? Forgive me.
First Chicago story.
Go on. Oh, go on.
Like C2E21.
Right, like 2010 or something. Keep going. Yeah.
No, it was before 2010 because Linda died that year.
Oh, okay. Forgive me.
In any event, it was just ridiculous having this very old man stand in line for 3 hours. And I felt a little bad that my wife, who could kick ass better than anybody else I know, marched through all that to get me in. I had a panel. It just so happens I wouldn't have been on that panel if she couldn't get me in or somebody didn't get me in. And she did, and it was one of my proudest moments at a convention. And I've only done 5 billion conventions.
You've been doing this a long time, man. No, absolutely. Ostrander, though, we're walking around, and we happen to be walking by Bendis's table. And at this point, I was already friends with Bendis. And he's like, "Oh, that's Brian Bendis. See, I've always wanted to meet him, but look at that line." I'm like, "John, wait 1 minute." I'm like, "Bendis, this is Ostrander." Brian gets up from the table. He goes over and he hugs him. He's like, "I can't tell you how inspirational your comics were to me when I was in college." You know, talking about his 80s run that you were editing a lot of his stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Know, and yeah. And so, and Brian sits back down. He's like, "Oh, I'm so glad you did that." I'm like, "John, you're a big deal. I don't know how to break it to you, but literally this generation, and honestly, Bendis, Brubaker, Rucka, they're all John fans. They're all John O fans. And Gail, Simona, as you well know, and as John well knows, Yeah,
absolutely. John was, and hopefully still is, he's not doing much writing, one of the major forces in comics. And I'm so happy, literally, to have been part of that. He's always been a sort of mild-mannered guy. He held it in sometimes because life is bullshit, and if you have only 2 choices in life, you hold it in or you let it out.
Yeah, and they lock you up.
John held it in until Wasteland, and then he got it all out in Wasteland, and I think that he got enough of it out to for the rest of his life. I think he got it all out in Wasteland. I canceled that book. DC Comics, my employer, did not. I canceled that book after issue 18. First of all, I was totally blown away that we made it past issue 6. So this is because the idea, and John and I created this in the rain while walking around a lake once. Every issue would up the ante just a little bit. We'd get a little scarier, a little, So after 18 issues, it was getting really dangerous. And it took John as long to write one Wasteland story, we have 3 stories in each issue, as it did for him to write a full superhero comic. So he was writing the best stuff in his life, in my very humble opinion, and starving to death doing so, because he could only make 1/3 the amount of income off of Wasteland.
Wow.
So finally it was like, "John, you've missed too many meals."
I don't understand. Maybe you do, why they haven't put out an omnibus of those 18 issues, because really, everybody, you got to understand that once the code was lifted, and I want you to talk about this as well. But first, let's talk about Wasteland. DC came into horror really full force, and everything, House of Mystery and all the other great horror anthologies of the 70s and stuff. Wasteland really was the evolution where John and Del Close and the artists that you guys had on Wasteland and Mike editing, you all went a notch higher. And it really was extreme in the way that Watchmen and Dark Knight were superhero extremes. And I don't mean that in that image extreme, because there was
Right.
meat on those bones beyond the shock. And certainly in Wasteland, these are really smart stories as well as being horrific. So from an omnibus standpoint, do we know why it hasn't been collected?
I have a good idea why it hasn't, because when the documentary about Wasteland came out, they were going to do some digital reprints. I don't know if they did or not.
I think they
Because
did.
one of the stories. I'm sorry?
I think they did. I think they're on Amazon, but I could be wrong. Keep going.
So they one of the stories had a word that we used back in that day that they and probably John and I would not use today.
Okay.
It was used in context. We didn't have the comics code, but in dialogue we referenced the N word.
Okay.
And which I think is the only word I'm not allowed to say over on Pop Culture Squad.
Yes. Yes.
That's okay. I just can't talk about Dick Gregory's autobiography then.
You're right. Which has the N word as a title. You're absolutely right. The great comedian and
That's
advocate.
The title.
Right.
And it's a great book that you can't find in libraries anymore. So
I suppose so. That's a shame. But go on.
Oh yeah, it is. Oh my God, yeah. And that's before Trump.
Oh yeah. Well, again,
Yeah, I'm hip. So, okay, fine. I'm on the phone with John. It's a conference call, and the editor-in-chief over at DC, and we're having a wonderful conversation. And I understand the position they're in, but I'm not going to say, well, go ahead and change it, because John didn't want to change it. And even though I'm no longer editing that book, nor is the book being published, I know my responsibilities here. And my responsibilities to the talent is to protect what the talent wants in their image. If John were to say, no, it's okay, you can change it, fine. John did not say that.
Interesting.
So that story did not get reprinted, and I have no idea what, if any, others didn't. And it's possible they just had a bad taste in their mouth about the whole thing. They didn't. My guess is they had better things to do with their time than debate with me, which is never a good idea. You got to have a lot of time and an enormous amount of patience. And that's how that happened. I think that pretty much killed an omnibus, at least for the time being. But those omnibuses, which should be referred to as omnibi,
of course,
they only print a few hundred copies of those things.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that limited of a run. But keep going. Yeah.
At sometimes, I mean, some Watchmen for crying out loud.
Well, sure.
That high.
Sure, but, and it is a high-priced item when it is that big. It does cost
so heavy.
Yes. Oh my God, John, or pardon me, Mike. I apologize. We keep when we bring our comics in the bathroom to read. I mean, that thing will cut off your circulation, for God's sake.
Absolutely. No. I read digitally now because of that.
So, John, a lot of my comics now I do read digitally as well. I respect that absolutely.
And
again, I'm sorry, Mike. I keep calling you John. I apologize, man.
I take it as a compliment. The our eyesight isn't doing so well
exactly.
either. So, you can blow it up and stuff. But some of those omnibuses are they weigh more than the talents inside. I mean, I'm a big Fourth World fan, but that Fourth World omnibus with everything that Jack did on the Fourth World, It weighs more than me. Now, I've lost a little weight, but not that much.
I see it in your face, John or Mike. God damn it! I got to stop doing that, mother.
You see,
Anyway.
it's right there on
Yeah, I
the
know.
screen.
I'm looking at you, and I'm looking at your name, of course, Mike. Well, again, give the origin story of Wasteland.
Well, Jor-El and Lara got really drunk one night. No, they say a mind is a terrible thing to waste. No, I made a living off it. We're looking for a new project. We wanted to do something really scary and new and different and stuff. And we loved working on Munden's Bar. Munden's Bar was the backup in Grimjack, where we did Wasteland-like stories. They were generally a little more in your face in terms of the humor. But there were some great stories in that. We wanted to do that type of anthology. So John comes up. I was living in Fairfield, Connecticut at that time. And John comes up, spend the night. We take this walk around this lake. There was a small, let's just call it a large duck pond that was in my backyard at this housing complex that I lived at. And we walked around this thing in the rain. It started to rain, started to drizzle, and it was coming down pretty good by the time we stopped, because we were so intense about developing that which was Wasteland. Now, we knew that Dell would be involved in it, because Dell was involved in Munden's Bar, and because anytime you can get in Dell's proximity, you took advantage of the opportunity. So I'm having a swell time. John's having a swell time. We're plotting this whole thing out, not stories, just the concepts. And the concept of each issue being a little bit more volatile or upsetting, or I was going to say annoying, but history has a sense of tamping that down. And I don't think it annoys people now. And we settled on the idea of having 4 rotating artists. 3 would have interior stories. The 4th would have the cover, and then we'd change all that. And then we tossed around names of people that we hoped would be available. I think I was the one who proposed Don Simpson, Bill Loebs. We just had this unbelievable cast of talent. And then after a while, as David Lloyd had to do, David dropped out after the first 6 issues. And I think that because he got other commitments and other projects, and that's great. And we replaced him. I forget with whom. Bill Ray did some stories, and Jesus, just wonderful people. Truman did a couple of fill-ins for us. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And then decades later, unbeknownst to John or I, they made a documentary about it. And the documentary is really about Dell, but it's limited to the Wasteland, or focused around the Wasteland. I did some promotion for the documentary along with some of Dell's former students, and everybody who'd ever passed through any part of Dell's life, from Nichols and May all the way to Stephen Colbert and Amy,
all these comedy greats. Amy Poehler, yes, a lot of SNL vets. And forgive me, I'm just going to fill this in for people who don't realize. Del Close ran Second City and Improv Olympic, and literally, Chris Farley was a student. Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau were students of his. Mike Myers even spent time with Del and can talk about time with Del. Yeah, he was a very, very important part of not only Chicago comedy, but really the modern comedy age. A lot of these people that you love today can point to Del. Please continue.
Absolutely. And Dell was, I don't want to say intimate, but I mean that in a psychological sense, with at least three of the Murray brothers. At least
Yes.
three.
Yeah.
Maybe more. Now we used
Bill,
to play,
Brian, and Joel probably.
and yes, exactly.
And I forget
And-
the youngest Murray, but yeah. No, it's a great comedy family.
Well, there's
Absolutely.
more than just four. We used to play this game in Chicago, probably somewhere around North Avenue, called Name the Murray Brother. And one time, I actually beat Joel. Now, Joel Murray has a wonderful career, although kind of got eclipsed by his more famous brothers, perhaps. But he starred in a wonderful Bobcat Goldthwait movie. I'm a huge Bobcat Goldthwait movie fan because they're so damn absurd and so righteous. He also was on, when Dell died, the troupe put together a little thing for him, a tribute to him, and during Comedy Week in Manhattan back then. And they asked John and me to come out. They'd interview us, and then they would perform a few stories from Wasteland. They got DC's permission to do that.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was wonderful and it was amazing. And John was like in a different galaxy watching this.
Sure.
He was. It was worth it just to watch the reaction on his face. But then again, so was watching the first Suicide Squad movie, and that was by far the weaker of the two.
100%.
So it was watching John. We're friends because I like to watch him.
That is so great, man. And then, of course, the Great Del Close story about his skull and what happened to his skull after his death. Everybody.
Do you know the real truth about that?
Yeah, I'll take the apocryphal and the real truth behind that.
Okay, the apocryphal story is that as Dell was dying, and he had a big party for his death, right before his death, like hours before his death, he lost my thought. Wow.
About the skull and the fake story about the skull.
Sorry.
No worries.
He said,
Mike, I do it all the time. Do not sweat it, please.
Get used to it, young. Get used to it. He said that he was going to will his skull to the Goodman Theater Company. Now, Dell, unbeknownst to some, was also quite the Shakespearean actor, and it's probably the only thing he constantly did straight. And by straight, I'm not saying without drugs. I'm saying
seriously,
like an actor straight.
Yeah.
And after he died, everybody, that story grew as he knew it would, and everybody thought it was real. And they had a skull there behind the artistic director's desk at the Goodman. And so he said, "Oh yeah, that's Dell's skull." So at that event that I was just talking about, Dell's partner was there, and I told her that that's like Dell's in equity, right? And she goes, "Oh, of course he is. He was on stage doing Shakespeare. How they don't allow normal people to do that. You got to be in equity." Fine. So I said, so therefore, that skull is an equity skull, and every time the Goodman uses it, you should get a check. And Charna's eyes lit up. It was like 3 a.m. or something. We were in the middle of Manhattan, steam coming up out of the streets. It was just a very scary sight. And she's thinking, maybe we could do this. Problem is, the Goodman knew it wasn't the real skull, in that it wasn't Dell's skull, and he didn't know whether it was a Union skull or not. And it took a few years before it went public that it wasn't the real skull, which is what everybody assumed and nobody wanted to believe. Everybody wanted to believe that was Del Close's skull that they were using. Alas, poor Yorick. Wow.
There's Del.
Great at Shakespeare, and I have pretty high standards when it comes to Shakespeare. But it was just about the only thing he I want to say took seriously, but maybe that was just how he was programmed and he wasn't taking it seriously.
Movie buffs can find him in The Untouchables. He's the accountant in The Untouchables, Capone's accountant, and he's all in black, and he looks very period. It's hilarious.
He actually gave The Untouchables their name in the movie.
Oh, that's I see the character. Yes, indeed. Yes.
I'll tell you a Del Close story about that. He's there, and Costner is there playing Elliot Ness, and Sean Connery comes up playing the assistant,
the rough Irish cop that becomes a Fed with Elliot Ness.
Big Irish cop guy with a great Scottish accent, and. Now, Del had met Connery before. I mean, they weren't good friends or anything like that, but he knew him. They knew each other, kind of. So he's doing the scene with Kevin Costner, and he's going like, "Well, what do you think you are, untouchable?" And then he turns to Sean Connery and goes, "Hamina, hamina, 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 hamina." He blows it just by peering into Sean Connery's eyes. I would have had the same reaction.
Oh, yeah.
Except that they wouldn't let me get that close. So,
off the air, I got to tell you a Sean Connery story that my friend experienced. But we'll save that for off the air because it's not appropriate. But it has nothing to do. Don't worry. It's a rated R story. But anyway. Okay. Hey, and I'm really glad, first of all, both Joe Illidge and Eric Pilecki acknowledging that, yes, this is a podcast crossover event. And Eric Pilecki says, yes, Mike and Bob Harrison host the other great comics interview podcast. Well, you're kind of compare me to what Bob and Mike do. But yeah, let's take a second and promote your excellent interview podcast that you do with Bob Harrison.
We do one every Tuesday. Unless something horrible has happened to one of us, and occasionally on Thursdays as well, because Bob knows everybody in the comics business the way I used to know everybody in the comics business, but now there are all these youngins out there. So, Bob handles that, and it's wonderful. I wind up being a cheerleader for comics causes like mentoring, like encouraging others to reach for the bleachers, knock it out of the park. And if you don't make it, that's fine. The journey is worth it. You will find stuff that you wouldn't have done otherwise. And nobody wants, pardon the expression, to read the same old shit over and over and over again.
Yeah, agreed.
Although to a certain extent that's what comics is about, but
yeah.
Okay, fine. Let's get away from that. Let's see what we can do if we're not 100% positive where we're going. We know what we're doing. We're not positive where or how. Let's find out. That's a wonderful approach. I can discuss that with the younger talent. And by younger, I mean, anybody who was born pretty much after the Civil War. And I can encourage that, and we can talk about that. And I realize I'm just sort of, I'm ginning up the atmosphere, but that's in my job description.
I get it. Absolutely, man. Well, again, you really.
Oh, I lost you.
Oh, well, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
No. Let's
I can
see.
hear-
Maybe it's my
okay.
computer.
How about now?
I can't hear you.
Oh,
Okay.
still no.
Not yes or no if you can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, you
Yes.
can hear me.
Oh, well.
Audio.
I'll let Mike figure this out. Absolutely.
Oh,
How about now, Mike? Here, I'm even gonna. If you're not already looking there, I've got a sign. Oops.
okay.
And now your picture went out, but yeah, I can still hear you. Hopefully his picture will come back. He'll figure it out. While Mike is figuring it all out. Yeah, this is I believe it's Pop Culture Hound, and if I'm wrong, please somebody in the chat correct me. The title of
All right,
Bob.
let's try this.
All right, very good. Mike and Bob on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great show, and I see Bob all the time at conventions, and we always compare notes. Oh, who have you had on lately? I'm like, well, I had X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I had A, B, and C. That's excellent, man. So yeah, it's fun, and Bob moderates a lot of panels at conventions. I wonder if, and I was going to ask Mike when he gets back, I was going to ask him if he can figure out Terrificon. Or rather, if he and sorry everybody, I'm discombobulated now too. He if he and Bob are going to be doing panels at Ithacon, and hopefully they will put them on their show as well. That would be great. I'd certainly do it with my stuff. So, but we're hoping that Mike can come back. Oh, I still had so much to talk to Mike about because he's so great, man. And those great first comics. Here we go. He's back on video. I don't know if he's back on audio. I don't know. Still can't hear me, Mike. I'm assuming. How about now, Mike? I saw something switch. Can you hear me now, Mike? You're gonna edit all this out when I put the audio on. Mike, are we back? No.
Well, we can see me. We can't hear me, or I can.
I'm sorry.
You can hear me.
I can hear you fine. Yes.
And I can't hear you. I'll tell you what. Write it down and hold it up to the camera.
I will while we're doing that. Here, title of hold on. Did it work? Oh, I'm sorry. Here, hold on, everybody. I just put it in the chat rather than a banner. Hold on. This is hilarious.
Anything? No. Oh, a title of your podcast. What is the title of my podcast?
Yes. Yeah.
Me.
Yeah. With Bob.
Jesus, like working with Buster Keaton without the pratfalls. I love technology.
This is hilarious.
Idiots, stop mic cam. Oh, the title of the podcast is called Pop Culture Squad Cast. Pop Culture Squad Cast.
There you
It's
go.
sort of a spin-off from the Pop Culture Squad website,
Yes.
where I am found every Monday, if I remember, which is about 4 out of 5 weeks.
Excellent. Very
I
cool.
think, today I did something about, oh God, I just wrote it yesterday. You'd think I'd remember. I don't know. Something cool.
Here, and folks, if you have questions for Mike, I'm gonna ask you to put them in the chat, and I will do the same right now. Because I'm writing a question right now for Bob that I will, or pardon me, for Mike. And hold on, because I do want to get his answer to this. This is hilarious, by the way, that we're doing it this way. There you go, Mike. Look at the camera, Mike. Because I'm asking him, don't TV and movies about comics need to evolve too?
Don't TV and movies about comics need to evolve too? Sorry, I'm just playing with all of this
No, I know.
computer stuff. Maybe. I think I'm actually fond of the Marvel TV shows and many of the Marvel movies, perhaps most. Oh, that's what I wrote about this week. I wrote about Daredevil and how much I'm enjoying Daredevil, the TV show, which I'm enjoying immensely. Not just because of Vincent D'Onofrio, but he's where I start.
Sure.
One of our great actors. I think TV and movies have to evolve the way TV and movies normally evolve, which is very slowly. Although streaming has helped things quite a bit, I think, because they're different media than comics. It's not that one is better or worse. You can do different things in comics. In comic books, we control the time. We control the space. We control the use of the space. Comics is a wonderful form for creative megalomaniac because we just control time. TV, and more so movies, is an instantly, as opposed to sequentially, collaborative art form. So they get to evolve the way movies and TV shows tend to evolve. I'd like to see more character in the characters, but by and large, I think if they have a good story and they know how to do it, they'll do it. Marvel makes good movies because they're following an adaptation of the old Marvel Comics formula. It's one world, everybody knows each other in that one world, and we all occupy the same sort of space. DC, everything is the DC movies, which are Warner Brothers movies. But Warner owns DC, so nobody can tell. They have been very individual. They have been, okay, it's this director's approach, it's that director's approach, it's this, and they've gotten a lot of crappy movies because of that. And finally, after 10 or 15 years, they finally went and watched a Marvel movie and figured out, like, oh, that's how you do it. And so they hired the guy who did it best one of the guys who did it best over at Marvel. And now he is co-running the entire DC Studios operation. And as we've seen from the return to the old 1970s DC Bullet, they're the dog, the comics are the tail. I am not putting them down at all. I think they have a good idea. They've made, a good movie, a great TV series, and that was even before the current administration. I think The Penguin was just brilliant and daring. So if our comics are going to be daring, that's the part they should lift for the movies and for television. Be daring. It's not natural for people to put on costumes, fly around, and talk to raccoons. Well, it is in certain parts. The original comic book stores in Chicago were on Skid Row, and I think it was fairly common back then. But that was the 60s. Be daring. Let your characters do what those characters would do in the real world, but enhanced. It's over the top. Movies, particularly heroic fantasy, and this is all heroic fantasy. Heroic fantasy works best when it's near over the top and occasionally kind of dribbles over. And I'm not just talking about superhero comics. I'm talking about Wasteland. I mean, if I'd ever done a romance comic, the publisher would be out of business. But if I'd ever done a romance comic, it would be that way. It would be kind of extreme, Tom King did that this past year. He did a really nice job. I understand that he confused a few people. They probably needed to be confused. Uh, I see Marvel or Dark Horse actually is reprinting that Jim Steranko romance story. That's cool. I think that was his last full job over at Marvel, full story job.
Yeah.
That's cool. That was really pretty. It was probably a little bit heavily influenced by the times. We were just coming out of sort of the Peter Max days. A lovely man, Peter Max, by the way,
Cool.
who I met on Underground News at was Channel 44 in Chicago? Yeah, I think so. And they
That's
shot
right.
in Paul Harvey's studio, which I thought was hilarious.
Amazing. Wow.
But,
That's great.
That's a whole nother story.
I'm hip. That's fantastic. Jesus.
Okay, you're going to have to like type something. Here we go. Look at that. I just think the superhero stories, like the Western, superhero stories need to be, yes. Well, I agree. Here's the first thing. They didn't do Superman's origin again. They set the new movie, the forthcoming movie, about an hour and a half later.
Yeah.
Superman's Clark Kent's early years.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because, if you don't know all the Krypton stuff and all that,
You don't need it.
Okay, fine. You've been living in a very remote corner of Mars. But you'll figure it out a lot faster than you'll figure out what it took Clark Kent to be raised as a normal human being with these extraordinary powers and these unbelievable responsibilities. That's the interesting part. They didn't do a recap of Daredevil's origin after, on this new series. You can kind of figure it out all on your way around, and that's the way it's supposed to be. The superhero battle scenes, the fight scenes, we need to open that up a little bit. They did that actually on the original Netflix Daredevil series. They did a wonderful job of that. They really got into this sort of linear fight scene thing that was just amazing because it was claustrophobic and you can feel what Matt Murdock was feeling. So the creators, the directors, the writers of our media presentations need to think outside of the comic book box a little bit, and maybe a lot, because the comic book box has been, I will not make a kitty litter reference because that would be unfair and wrong, but it's been used a lot.
Yeah. Exactly. He's got it. No, I'm going to ask him now for Ange. I love to hear any stories about editing American Flag or Denny O'Neil's The Question.
Oh, those are two different balls of wax. It's like my children. I can't pick like a favorite. Editing Flag was totally different than editing The Question, which in turn was totally different from editing Wasteland or The Flash or any of the other characters. John Sable was very, very different from editing Mike Grell previous to that. The Question was because I was sharing an office with Denny O'Neil, and I desperately wanted to get Denny to write for me or for a regular brand new series, because we're only talking about one of the absolute all-time greatest comic book writers in the history of ink to print. And I thought The Question would be a good place to start. Now, we couldn't do Steve Ditko's Question. For one thing, you can't do epic stories along those lines. For another thing, that was a very personal statement from Steve, like much of his work was. And we wouldn't go there just out of respect. So, there's a reason why we remember The Question. Not because he looks like Mr. A. So we didn't redo the character. We just refocused the character. The real character in the question was Hub City. That was the star. Vic and the rest of the cast, that's great. You got to have humans doing stuff. But it was Hub City that was the cast. And by the way, Hub City, both Denny and I got it immediately. I think it was Denny's suggestion. He wanted Hub City to be like East St. Louis, Illinois. And I'd been to East St. Louis several times. He grew up near there. And the real East St. Louis, even at the time of the question, was something that we couldn't publish. People would not believe what an incredibly silly, stupid, ill-organized, ill-run city that could be. They lost their city hall to a guy who sued them. He took their city hall and charged them rent for staying there. You know? Now, don't tell this to President Trump. It'll give him ideas. But that's how East St. Louis worked, and that's what became Hub City. American Flag is certainly focused on its environment almost as much, but it's very, very much character-driven, and it's very much Howard Chaykin-driven. I made a joke once about how Flag was a great opportunity to take advantage of, because before American Flag, all of Howard's work was perceived as ahead of its time. And then after American Flag, like it or not, and it's usually not fair, it would be compared to American Flag. It wasn't American Flag. It was Last Kiss was something else. I mean, it's just, they're just different projects. They're different types of stories. It ain't Star Wars. It is a wonderful maneuver through Howard's mind, Howard Chaykin's mind. And I'm sure that years after he dies, if man is still alive in the year 2525, there will be shrinks writing books about Howard based on American Flag. That too would not be fair, but at least it would be understandable. We do that to our literary heroes, and these guys are literary heroes in my book, and I suspect with a lot of the folks who are out here in the ether with us right now.
Were there any issues with
Any
Flag?
issues with Flag from a censor standpoint? Nope, I was the censor.
Okay.
Never let your editor be the censor. You're gonna, unless you want a book like American Flag. Yes. Chaykin, well, on fire.
Chaykin was on fire.
Yes.
That's what I meant to say.
Howard and I share a lot of cultural experiences. And and that's sort of some background material for our approach. He has turned me on to more great music than almost anybody else I can think of. And my music background, for those of you who remember my show on Chicago radio, is pretty wide.
Eclectic.
I mean, I don't play madrigals, and that's about it. And Howard contributed to that mightily, and he still does. When I'm around Howard, I often just shut my mouth, which is something that people didn't think I was capable of. Because if I babble too much, then I'm not learning enough. I'm not absorbing enough.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty for a guy with my tastes and his sensibilities, knowing full well that I will never dress as well as Howard. I've resigned myself to that. We were at Baltimore about 4 years ago. I think it was right before COVID, but the whole COVID thing destroys my place in the time space continuum.
Everybody.
But that's where we were. And he was telling a large group of people, what he wanted as his epitaph on his tombstone. Because, that's what you talk about at comic book conventions. And I said, yeah, that's good. May I make a suggestion? And Howard says, oh, yeah, sure. Here's the editor guy. Of course he's going to do that. And I says, yeah, try this. Here lies Howard Chaykin. Quote, am I ahead of my time now? End quote. Howard, being a man, and I mean that not in the macho sense, but in the human being sense of the word, conceded. And that was like 5 years ago, and I'm still floating off of that one.
Outstanding. That's fantastic,
So,
man.
I mean, Denny O'Neill's son, Larry, was also an assistant on American Flag. Dean Haskell and
Larry
Larry
O'Neill.
O'Neill, and they're still good friends today.
Yes.
Larry's been out on the West Coast for a very long time, so I hardly ever see him. But Dean, I follow Dean around. I'm his puppy. He'll be at Ithaca.
Yes.
He's often at shows that allow me in, and he's a frequent on the Pop Culture Squadcast.
Yes.
In fact, once when John Ostrander was supposed to be on, but he was having worse technical difficulties than we're having right now, Dean just sat in for an hour. He did an hour with me while Bob was trying to help John fix his computer, which, by the way, was the last steam-driven computer Apple ever made. So we had our work cut out for us. Dean, I love Dean. He's a real Renaissance man. He is the true Renaissance man of comics. His background and his history are amazing, and he's smart and clever and funny. And oh, did I mention a brilliant cartoonist, one of our best, who never plays it safe.
Nope.
To the point where he took one of his characters and had him team up with himself. Yes.
Red Hook. Absolutely, man. No, that's true. Here's another one.
All right. Not to turn this into a Chaykin talk. How can you not? It would be hard to edit him on Blackhawk, given DC not first. Great question. And people say great question when they're just stalling for time. Not me. I have an answer to that, but it's still a great question. No, not really. Howard knew the limits at DC and pushed against them, and we did stuff in Blackhawk that we never would have done in American Flag, not because of the difference in publisher, but because of the difference in time. American Flag allowed us to do Blackhawk. Everybody said that there was on-screen sex in American Flag. No, there wasn't. Show me. Show me. If you think there was, it wasn't. Implications? Oh my God, yes. You could wring out any issue and have a bucket full of that, but nothing on screen. Blackhawk got laid. And Blackhawk would get laid.
Sure you would. Yeah.
In some ways, it was a very hard book to do because Howard was so excited that he would keep on adding more and more really cool stuff to it. And it was kind of hard. We had to sort of straighten it all out afterwards. Like, okay, that's great, but, how do we get from A to B? But that's just the technical aspects of putting together comic book stories. He, and of course, he was the guy who was drawing his own stuff. So, he knew what in the story was going to work visually. I love working with writer-artists for that reason and for many others.
Sure.
I didn't say I prefer it, but I do like it. So, the Blackhawk was pretty much the way we would have done it at that moment in time at First Comics had we owned Blackhawk, which would have been a sign of the apocalypse. Hub City, like Frank Miller's inspiration for Sin City or Brubaker's criminal series. Felt like that. Yeah, now that you mention it, I see that, and I consider that high praise, particularly with Ed's stuff. Sin City is, well, yeah. I mean, it was too much of it, but it was Frank's tribute to and What If story.
Oh,
The tribute was to Mickey Spillane, and the what if is what if Mickey Spillane were writing stories about Las Vegas, about Sin City, and was more upfront about breasts. Those are the those are the differences, and I think he did a wonderful homage to Mickey, who, by the way, was just one of the nicest people I've met in my life.
wow.
I've already discussed how Frank and I share this fetish for Zatoichi, so I guess it's only fair for me to say that. He Howard changed a lot of rules, a lot of expectations, and a lot of attitudes. Now, everybody should be doing that. That's a viable medium. But Howard is this innovative force.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't do comic books. He doesn't do superheroes. He doesn't do heroic fantasy. He doesn't do erotica. He does Howard Chaykin. Every book of his, every story of his I ever published was rated Chaykin.
Agreed. Yes. Absolute 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. What will you be doing at Ithacon? I will be sitting on my ass,
No panels?
signing autographs, threatening to bang people over the head with my cane, enjoying the presence of some of my closest friends, and I mean that both personally and geographically. Any convention with those guys is fine by me. Haven't seen McGregor for a while, and that's nice. That's really nice. It's always nice to do that, to see somebody you haven't seen in years. Roger Stern is a regular at that show too. Walt Louisi Simonson. You know, I'm a cripple, but I would have helped them move.
Get it.
It's just that simple. No panels? Yes, I have 3 panels, and I don't know what they're about.
Oh,
I don't want to over prepare. I'm the Marlon Brando of panels. And
he doesn't need to. He always has stories.
we do anything for the Squadcast, we might. That's up to Bob. Bob is the producer of the Squadcast, which for me is an amazing feeling because I spent my entire life just about producing everything I was involved with, including all of my radio stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have a producer at any of the 23,000 different radio stations I had worked for. I was the producer,
Yep.
and we had a program director that had no idea what to do with me, no matter what his name. Except for Steve Stafford. Steve Stafford knew what to do with me. But that's beside the point.
Okay.
And way too inside. So, you know, Bob takes care of everything. He lines up the guests. I can ask for one, or I could do one, or invite one, and that's fine.
Sure.
But he doesn't tell me far in advance who he's going after, and he's got a long list of friends, for crying out loud. So it's kind of a surprise. It's like a pop-up interview.
That's
I'm
great.
a little bit prepared, but it's like a pop-up interview. I'm having the time of my life. Do you still do your internet radio show? No.
Okay.
Mike Robb was the producer of that in the sense that he was program director, because his idea of letting me do a radio show was it starts at noon. That was it. Oh, that's my idea of a manager.
Freeform radio.
Mike got very sick and Mike died.
Oh,
And
I'm
the
sorry.
whole, great guy and just one of my all-time closest friends. He was in radio probably longer than you, maybe even longer than me. I don't recall whether he actually met Marconi. He may have. But we were doing this for a Canada outfit, and the whole thing was with them.
Oh.
It was with him and them. And Mike, of course, was supposed to get better. And that didn't happen.
Jeez.
Never did the last show, but I have this saying about radio that I may have laid on you, and you probably relate to 100%. You almost never know when your last show was. You almost never know that. Frankie Lee over at WXRT, great guy, a wonderful guy.
One of my best friends.
Big ass comics, science fiction fan.
Very much so.
Wonderful guy. And he was with WXRT since roughly the Titanic was hit.
Yeah, over 40 years, everybody. For real. Yeah.
I know you're saying stuff. I can only imagine what. I wish I could hear it.
No, it's good.
Frankie retired a couple of years ago.
No, actually now. But...
which saddened me greatly. I listened to his retirement show, and it was brilliant. And within a week or two, he was back on the air doing weekends, and he did that for a couple of years. He just finally retired again, unless he came out of retirement again, and Charlie Meyerson hasn't informed me yet, which is his job. So I'm assuming that everything's cool, and he'll hate it. He'll hate it.
I hear you, man.
If I didn't have a microphone in front of me, I'm left with all this ego I don't know what to do with.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, Frank, yeah.
If you see him or talk to him soon, tell him to get back on the air. God damn it, I can't wait.
I so hear you, man. I am so with him on that.
And bring the Liettes with him. John used to work, for all these out there in the ether, John used to work at WXRT.
That's right, for 10 years.
I kind of worked there a little bit in that checks didn't bounce, but I wasn't really on staff there.
And Charlie was too, Morrison.
And it was in the earliest days when they were competing against me when I was on what was then called WEAW-FM. Every radio station I've ever been with has changed its call letters. Starting with WGLD, which changed its call letters from WOPA-FM to WGLD while I was there, and I was doing overnight, so it was literally while I was there, and they didn't realize it. I said, "Oh, thank you for naming the station after me." They changed it since then.
That's hilarious. That's fantastic, man. No, that's
and
amazing.
Sondling doesn't own it anymore. I don't know who owns these things anymore.
Yeah, I hear you, man. He's right. That is so funny.
I think the dollar store. I think the dollar
pretty
store
much, exactly. Yeah, it's sad, man. Here, we can wrap if you want.
All right. Yeah, geez. I wish. Yeah, I know.
I'll call you.
All these wires and tubes and wires.
Yeah.
It seemed like such a good idea at the time. Little did we know that computers were going to completely ruin our lives. Artificial intelligence? Sure, I'm not here. John, it's always wonderful. I will do anything for you, but I will absolutely do this little ego fest of mine on your airwaves. I thank you so much. I hope to see you next time I'm in Chicago. I hope to get to Chicago pretty damn soon.
Good.
But I did have them airmail me some Italian beef because I haven't been there lately. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to call you.
Thank you, folks.
I'm going to call you. All right. Thanks
out there in
Mike.
listener land.
Excellent.
I hope to hear from you all soon.
Absolutely, man. That's great.
I'm diving.
Mike Gold, everybody. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed Mike's conversation. I'm going to edit it for the audio people because Mike was having audio trouble. But yeah, and again, Mike will be at Ithacon, ithacon.org if you need tickets. And also, again, later tonight, I'm going to be talking to the aforementioned Dean Haspiel and Vito De La Sante about their podcast and what they're doing at Ithacon as well. That's all coming up later tonight on another edition of Word Balloon Live. Thanks a lot for listening. Everybody, thanks for watching. Stay safe, Stay happy, stay healthy.